So today we're going to look briefly at the rise and fall of the power of the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church owes most of its success to the fall of the Roman Empire. By 300 AD, the Romans were spread just too thin, from Britain to Spain, all the way to the Middle East, and so they began to pull back from those far regions. And that power vacuum was quickly filled by all the warring tribes that they had been keeping under control. And those tribes followed them all the way back to Rome, where they basically destroy the city and sack most of Italy. Now, the Catholic Church had been working very hard creating a Catholic Europe, and they set up a hierarchy very much like a governmental organization. And with a Bible in one hand and a sword in another, they went through Europe and they converted the people to Catholicism. They dictated everything that they were to eat, what to wear, how to act, how to fight, who to fight, when to fight. And they got those troops under control. And by the year 1000, they were set. They were the power over Europe. So from the year 1000 to 1300, the church was in complete control, economically, socially, politically. They were the keepers of all the religious artifacts that had been stolen from the Middle East during the Crusades. They were the keepers of knowledge. They were, of course, the final word on whether or not you're going to go to heaven. But by the year 1309, the Pope was really unhappy about living in this devastated mess. Rome was a structural disaster, and thugs roamed the streets where they raped and robbed and killed people. And so fleeing from this city and taking the papacy to Avignon, France, seemed like a perfect solution. So here in the comfort of this beautiful palace, under the protection of the king, the papacy stays there until 1378, when a young nun named Catherine of Siena walks to Avignon and begs the Pope to return to Rome, where the church was founded, where St. Peter was buried, and where the church should stay. So Pope Gregory XI is celebrated as the Pope that restored the church to Rome. But unfortunately, he dies shortly after his return. And so the Curia met, which is their job, to elect a new pope. Now, here is the problem. During the Avignon papacy, all of the cardinals that had been appointed were French. And so now we have almost an equal number of French and Italian cardinals. So there's no firm majority. So the Italians make a deal with the French, and they say, listen, we need to keep the papacy here. We need an Italian to fix this papacy. And so if you agree, we'll make sure that the French's policies are, taken into consideration, and we'll be fair. And so the French agree. But it's not a hot minute that Urban V doesn't start being suspicious of the French and accusing them of trying to undermine his papacy. And so the French, disgusted, they pack up all their stuff and they move back to Avignon, where they promptly elect their own pope. Now, this is called the Great Schism, and it's going to last until 1418. I can't stress enough how damaging this was to the power of the papacy. Before the schism, the Pope's word was final. He was infallible in matters of religion. He was the moral compass for all of Europe, but now there's two. So who do I follow? Who's right? What happens if I choose wrongly? And so we're going to see these little regional kings and these little regional princes used to holding the power because the church said to the people, God wants them to rule. They're going to fill that void. And they're going to say, hey, it's not the Pope said I was to rule. It's that God said I'm to rule. So really the Pope is superfluous. We don't even need to pay attention to him. Now, not all the cardinals were blind to the fact that the church and the papacy is hemorrhaging power. And so they decide in 1409, to try to rectify this horrible situation. And they meet in Pisa, and they elect a third pope. Now, they thought that the first two popes would say, oh, okay, and resign, but they didn't do it. Now, even the lowest born Catholic is starting to get confused, and they want an end to this mess, this schism. So in 1414, a final curia that is made up of both French and Italian cardinals get together, and for 4 years, they're going to negotiate and discuss what's going to happen with the church. And in 1418, they decide that they're going to depose the two sitting popes, and they're going to elect Martin V, who will then be seated in Rome. The problem? Too little, too late. Damage has already been done. Regional kings and princes have already filled the power void. And the end result is not going to be a church that gets their act together and gets back on the moral high horse. Instead, it's going to be a papacy that embraces secularism. They're going to become the main patrons for the Renaissance. They are going to succumb to the corruption that results from unchecked power, as exemplified by my favorite, Pope Alexander VI. And the stage will certainly be set for complaints of their corruption, of their secularism, and for the rise of Martin Luther and his followers.